Welcome to Knovva Academy. My name is Alex Crosser, and I'm head of online learning. We're very excited to present the Pandemic and Public Health Initiative, designed to help teens around the world become better informed about one of the most impactful events of the modern era. The COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented challenge to our modern systems of healthcare, our economies, and our governments at every level, from local to global. Global challenges like this require global solutions, but is that enough to fight the pandemic in every neighborhood? How do the responsibilities of local systems differ from global ones? What are the challenges we're facing today, and what solutions must be developed? What kind of leadership will help us slow the spread of this pandemic and limit the damage it causes to our economic and public health? To help answer these questions and others, we're very fortunate to be joined today by Professor David King, a senior lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor King, in a few words, could you introduce yourself to our students and describe a little bit of your background as it relates to our conversation today?
Well, I've been teaching about U.S. politics and the focus on state and local government. I run a program at Harvard for leaders on state and local government. But I also run Harvard's training program for newly elected members of the U.S. Congress. So I spend much of my time thinking about U.S. national politics, and then on a very practical level, helping to train governors, mayors, city councilors, so forth.
All right, sounds like we got a breadth of leadership covered. What are the different factors that nations are struggling with as they try to tackle this challenge?
Countries are going to respond to this crisis very differently, and it will appear in different sets of challenges based on their own political history and their own economies. This began as a problem, a crisis in an urban center because of high density. And if we look at where the crisis has really hit around the world, it has tended to be in very dense situations where social distancing is much more difficult, where mass transit is a part of life. And this is the reality of the efficiencies of large cities. Large cities are remarkable economic engines, but they also historically, throughout human history, have been the location of the greatest health crises. The great plagues and pandemics of past happened where there was great density. So the countries and localities that are going to survive among those that are dense are ones where their economy can quickly separate people, where not everyone is living in a kind of a crowded tenement situation. I think we'll see massive differences in India based on the city that people happen to live in. Those that rely on mass transit and have sketchy local sanitation, they're going to do very poorly over the next few months. The newer sections of their large cities where mass transit has a less important role and sanitation is much better, they will do much better. Now, this is a pandemic that's going to go into rural areas, but at least in the short run, it's a crisis of crowded cities. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as more people are commuting to work through the computer, I think you'll also see a return to the suburbs in many communities where it will feel safer to them. So that'll change the governing problems and governing structures in all of these countries as well. How do you deal with mass transit? What do you do with the roads? How do you put in an infrastructure, a telecommunications infrastructure for the next stage of our economy? It'll be fascinating to watch.
What are some of the challenges or barriers to international collaboration at this stage?
You know, the basic mindset of many countries is still one of competition. It's very much like a capitalistic competition. We can outdo you at any cost. We want to gain market position. We want to gain sort of status and prestige. We want our exports and imports to really be rocking the world. And that's the kind of competition that right now During this crisis, this pandemic is not helpful because the path forward um, to a vaccine, to a widely usable, rapidly deployed antigen test, that is not going to happen through competition, but through coordination. You need a coordinating mechanism to say, we will guarantee there will be mass purchases of your vaccine. We guarantee rapid trials in this country. We guarantee that if you pass the trials in that country, we're going to accept the vaccine other places. We don't right now actually have a system in place for that. The United Nations wouldn't do that. The World Health Organization won't do it. It's most likely going to emerge out of a nonprofit or a set of nonprofits coordinating with pharmaceutical companies. But there will, I believe, be some kind of a coordinating mechanism. If we default to the standard competition among nations approach, competition can work in great times when that's what's called for. However, in a time of crisis and you need decisive action, and we need a vaccine, and we need transparency and accurate information, I think we need right now a coordinating mechanism, some kind of a body, some way to bring these pharmaceuticals together and to get things out in rapid trials and to inoculate the world. Private sector economic systems and economic entities are strongly incentivized to turn a profit. And in this environment, there are probably some quick profits that could be made, but that's not in the long-term interests of society. So we understand that that's in the short-term interests of these businesses, but government needs to be involved in helping to coordinate a response that's helpful long-term. So how do you encourage competition, because you need multiple approaches, moving towards a vaccine when these are, for the most part, private companies, drug companies, that have to take on massive costs in order to produce a potential virus? So governments need to find a way to guarantee that there will be massive purchases for a vaccine should one prove to be viable. But the race to create a vaccine is only going to respond to sort of economic incentives, and maybe 1 out of 10 might work. And they're all very, very expensive to get up and try. And simply private industry by itself wouldn't take on those massive costs of what could be a losing proposition, since few of these vaccine trials are actually going to work out. So now is the proper time for governments and nonprofits to invest heavily and quickly in incentivizing drug companies to come up with a viable vaccine. Of course, any crisis is also an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for us as individuals, as citizens, to learn, to grow, to change our behaviors. It's also, every crisis, an opportunity for political leaders to do good or to do bad. You know, the plagues of the past led to shutting down some of our borders, led to demonizing parts of society, led to violence. And a political leader who exploits that for his own advantage or her own advantage, who says, defend our boundaries no matter what and keep the other out, it's a real possibility and it's a real danger. I think the way we get around that is by having citizens talk to each other across boundaries, by helping to use our international institutions to keep the lines of communication going. But as we move through this crisis, let's be on the lookout for the populists who are turning us against each other, nation against each other, and those who are lining their own pockets. It's certainly going to happen. We have to be ever vigilant to try and punish it when we see it.
Why should we move away from fear? Why shouldn't we say we're terrified, I want to close my door and huddle and be safe? Why is it important to leave that door open?
This pandemic opens the door to populism and the gut instincts of citizens. It is often an appeal to their fears. Their fears of the other, the fears of that country, of those people within our own country who look different. The future of this world is one of interconnection. It's of coordination. It's of these multinational, international organizations. Short-term solutions like nationalism, like this sense of populism, might work if you're trying to get elected or hold on to power, but it's absolutely not the answer in the long run. In the long run, for us all to survive in this neighborhood of burning homes, we take coordination, communication, some transparency, a sense of who we are together. And so we're entering into a dangerous period in which people may blame others as opposed to blaming a virus. Well, we can fight a virus, but it's particularly dangerous when we are fighting each other.
Very well put. Thank you. I just want to comment that one of the most moving things that I've seen of late is videos friends have posted from the New York City balconies at 7 o'clock every evening. The city just makes as much noise as they can, giving a round of applause, banging on snare drums, playing horns and whatnot, just to show their appreciation for healthcare workers. So to that effect, I do think that in certain communities anyway, this is bringing us closer together.
I mean, this is a crisis that I think we're going to deal with relatively effectively. I think that's part of this that we haven't talked about, is that, despite all of the challenges, we're going to get through this, right?
Say more about that?
Well, if this is a neighborhood in which all of the houses are on fire or about to get on fire, are they going to burn down? And I think right now we can say no. A lot of these homes are going to be fine. They'll need to be remodeled. They can be remodeled a little bit later. Maybe we'll change how they're governed, or we'll change some of the regime types, or we'll change how some neighbors talk to other neighbors. But this is not the plague of the Middle Ages. This is not even the pandemic of 1918 and 1919 as a percentage of the population of the world that will be killed. This is not the destruction of Native Americans in the early 1500s. It's a different environment. Yes, many people will die, and despite our governing problems, despite the slow response from the United States, despite the lack of transparency around the world, what are we doing? We are actually self-isolating. And individual citizens are reading information, interpreting it on their own, and saying, you know what? Mom and dad, stay inside. And let's make our masks. And as a result, the death is going to be much lower than we were anticipating even a few weeks ago in the United States and around the world. Italy has already turned the corner. Spain has turned the corner. Is there going to be a bounce back in the fall? Well, most epidemiologists seem to think that that's going to happen. But having gone through it once, we will figure out as individuals and as countries how to respond again.
So what advantages do we have today that help us combat this pandemic more successfully than the world of the past?
Well, today we have access to information, and that's rapidly shared. And although there's still plenty of false information out there, the trust in expertise, in public health scientists is much, much higher today than it was 100 years ago, or in the witchcraft days of the plague. So we have tremendous advantages over the past. And we can work from home. Not everybody, of course, but the economy hasn't ground to a complete and total halt. Harvard University is still teaching courses through Zoom, having meetings with students through the internet. I'm seeing my grandchildren on the internet. We're more networked in a way that, of course, creates some vulnerabilities, but on balance leads us to be in a much better position to respond to this pandemic.
So, as a professor, as a father and a grandfather, how are you speaking with your students or with your kids or your grandkids about how to think about this moment and how to think about what comes next?
I am a father and I'm a grandfather, and I want to believe that I have some wisdom that maybe I can pass on to my children and my grandchildren. What has surprised me has been just how on the front lines my children have been about what's actually happening in the world. I think my children understand better than I do that the world has changed. So I don't know what's going to happen. And I am encouraged that we're seeing a lot more insight and leadership from younger people than we have from people my age. There's more of a sense of excitement and optimism among my students than there is among my colleagues at the university. And I think that bodes very well. Um, you know, a few years ago, we were hearing a lot and reading a lot about children of the world not being very resilient. They had had things handed to them on a silver platter. They haven't had all that many challenges. Well, I think you're going to see an awful lot of resilient young men and women figuring their way forward. And the strong advice and old patterns that came from their parents, go to school, make sure you do the following things in this order, may not apply in a new economy. And I'm hoping that there are many more people out there like my children willing to take risks, put aside the past paths, but be very conscious of their own health and their own community.
Well, Professor King, I want to thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I'm sure our students will benefit greatly from your perspectives. So thank you for helping us understand that in this moment of crisis, coming together is going to be important in so many different ways. So thanks for coming together with us. Do you have any parting words or words of wisdom or anything that you'd like to share?
I just want to underscore how inspiring my children's and grandchildren's generations are. And the people that I've seen and met through Knovva are people who are engaged in the world and interested and figuring out how to communicate with each other. They're not turning inward, they're turning outward. And that's what we need now more than ever. So thank you so much for reaching out. And my faith is in you. My faith is in this next generation. And I'm just excited to see what you all are going to come up with next.